Montana Territory, 1878. The unforgiving winter had finally released its grip on Silverdale Valley, giving way to spring that promised both renewal and uncertainty. Like the land itself, 25-year-old Quentin Blackett carried the scars of harsh seasons past, visible in the way his shoulders tensed when strangers approached, and in how his hand habitually hovered near his holstered Colt whenever he rode into town. The war between the states had ended 13 years prior, but for Quentin, peace remained as elusive as rain in August. Another year, another cattle drive, he muttered to himself, calculating the weeks it would take to move his modest herd to market. The ranch he'd built from nothing demanded everything: his sweat, his blood, his solitude. That was the price of survival in these parts, and Quentin had long ago decided that isolation was preferable to loss. His parents' graves on the eastern hillside of his property stood as silent testament to the frontier's cruel indifference. Quentin believed, with the certainty of mountains meeting sky, that a man couldn't afford attachments out here. The West took what it wanted, and those who survived were those who traveled light, in possessions and in matters of the heart. He'd watched too many good men broken by the dual burden of frontier hardship and family responsibility. His ranch hands respected him for his fairness and skill, but none would claim to know the man behind his storm-gray eyes. "Boss," called Sam, his foreman of 3 years. Mail came. "Looks like that order for fence posts finally got approved." Quentin nodded, taking the envelope. "Good, we'll need to secure the north pasture before the summer storms." But it wasn't the fence post approval that changed everything. It was the second letter, the one bearing the unfamiliar handwriting of a woman named Eleanor Grayson, who claimed to be the daughter of his father's oldest friend. She was coming west on the next stage, hoping for temporary lodging while she established herself as Silverdale's new schoolteacher. "Impossible," Quentin said aloud to the empty room after reading her letter. His ranch was no place for a city woman, especially one who'd likely never faced a day of true hardship. Yet his father's memory weighed on him. Debts of honor still meant something, even in this lawless territory. 3 days later, Quentin stood awkwardly at the stagecoach depot, hat in hand, scanning each passenger who descended from the dust-covered coach. He'd recognize her by the blue ribbon she promised to wear. The last passenger emerged slowly, a slender woman of perhaps 20 years, her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet adorned with the promised blue ribbon. Her traveling dress, once fine but now showing the wear of the long journey, hugged a figure more girl than woman. But it was her eyes that caught him, amber-flecked and wary, carrying a depth of experience that contradicted her youth. "Miss Grayson," he approached, keeping a respectful distance. "Mr. Blackett," her voice carried a surprising steadiness despite her obvious exhaustion. "Thank you for meeting me. I feared my letter might not have reached you in time." "It did," he replied simply, taking her carpetbag. "The wagon's this way." Eleanor Grayson said little as they left town, her gloved hands folded primly in her lap as the wagon jostled along the rutted trail to his ranch. Quentin found himself stealing glances at her profile, the straight nose, the determined set of her chin, the way her throat worked nervously when they passed a particularly rugged stretch of terrain. "It's farther than I expected," she finally ventured. "Most things are out here." Quentin adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "Town's growing, but slowly. School's still just the one room behind the church." "I've taught in worse conditions," she said with unexpected firmness. "In Philadelphia, my last position had 43 children in a basement with one window and perpetual flooding." Quentin raised an eyebrow. "Philadelphia seems a long way to come from, just to teach in a frontier town." Eleanor's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. "Some journeys are necessary, Mr. Blackett, regardless of distance." The defensiveness in her tone told Quentin all he needed to know. She was running from something. Everyone who came west voluntarily was, he wouldn't pry. Her reasons were her own, just as his reasons for staying were his. The ranch came into view just as the sun began its descent. A sturdy main house, 2 bunkhouses, a barn, and various outbuildings spread across a valley protected by pine-covered hills. Not the largest spread in the territory, but respectable, built by hand over 7 years of backbreaking work. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, and something in her genuine appreciation made Quentin glance at her with new interest. "It serves its purpose," he said, pulling the wagon to a stop. That evening, over a simple meal prepared by Cookie, the ranch's curmudgeonly cook, Eleanor explained her plans to begin teaching within the week. The town council had arranged temporary quarters above the mercantile until the teacher's cottage was repaired. "I'll only impose on your hospitality for 3 days at most," she assured him, "just until Mr. Jacobson clears the rodents from the mercantile apartment." Quentin nodded, uncomfortable with the strange intimacy of having a woman at his table. "Stay as long as needed. The guest room is yours." He showed her to the small but clean bedroom that had once belonged to his mother, feeling oddly protective as Eleanor surveyed the space with visible gratitude. When she thanked him, her eyes held a warmth that made him turn away abruptly. "Breakfast at sunrise," he said gruffly. "Don't expect much." That night, lying awake in his own bed, Quentin fought the unsettling awareness of another presence in his home. He'd lived alone for so long that even the soft sounds of Eleanor preparing for bed, the creak of floorboards, the gentle splash of water in the basin, felt like intrusions. Worse still was the odd emptiness he suspected would return when she left. The 3 days stretched into 5 when torrential spring rains flooded the creek between the ranch and town. Quentin found himself both irritated and inexplicably pleased by the delay, watching with growing fascination as Eleanor adapted to ranch life with surprising resilience. On the 6th morning, he found her in the kitchen before dawn, helping Cookie prepare breakfast for the hands. "You don't need to do that," Quentin said, pouring himself coffee. "I prefer to earn my keep, Mr. Blackett." She deftly flipped cornbread in the cast-iron skillet. "Besides, your cook has been teaching me frontier cuisine. Apparently my Boston baked beans recipe is fancified nonsense." Cookie's gruff laugh from the pantry confirmed this assessment. "You're from Boston?" Quentin asked, realizing how little he knew of her. "Born there, raised in Philadelphia after my mother died." Eleanor's hands never stopped working as she spoke. "Father was a professor. He insisted I receive a proper education, even when others thought it wasteful for a girl. And now you're here." Quentin studied her face in the lamplight, "teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in a town that might not exist in 10 years. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Now I'm here." The creek subsided enough for travel by the 8th day, and Quentin found himself reluctant to harness the wagon that would take Eleanor to town. She had somehow softened the edges of his solitary existence without disturbing its foundations, reading quietly in the evenings, helping with small chores, asking thoughtful questions about ranching that revealed her quick intelligence. As they approached Silverdale, Eleanor broke their comfortable silence. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Blackett. I won't forget it." "Quentin," he corrected, surprising himself. "Mr. Blackett was my father." Her smile transformed her face, bringing a glow to features that were more handsome than beautiful. "Then you must call me Eleanor." The town welcomed its new schoolteacher with cautious optimism. Eleanor proved herself quickly, earning respect through competence rather than charm, though Quentin noticed she possessed both in measure. He found reasons to visit town more frequently, ostensibly checking on supplies or mail, but inevitably passing by the schoolhouse to tip his hat to Miss Grayson. 3 weeks after her arrival, disaster struck. Quentin was inspecting fence lines when he saw smoke rising from the direction of town. He spurred his horse without hesitation, a cold dread settling in his chest as he rode. By the time he arrived, half the town had formed a bucket brigade. The schoolhouse and church were engulfed in flames, the spring winds pushing the fire dangerously close to neighboring buildings. "Where is she?" Quentin demanded, grabbing the sheriff's arm. Sheriff Mills pointed toward the mercantile. "Got all the children out, then went back for some books, made it out just before the roof collapsed." Quentin found Eleanor sitting on the boardwalk, a blanket around her shoulders, her face smudged with soot. She was consoling a sobbing child while Dr. Harper examined a burn on her forearm. "What happened?" Quentin crouched beside her, fighting the urge to check her for injuries himself. "Lamp oil spilled near the stove," she said hoarsely. "The flames spread so quickly." "You should have stayed out once the children were safe," he said, unable to keep the anger born of fear from his voice. Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Those books were donated by people who believe in education enough to sacrifice for it. I couldn't let them burn." "Dog." Harper finished bandaging her arm. "Nothing serious, but keep it clean. You were lucky, Miss Grayson." Lucky? Quentin's jaw tightened at the word. He'd seen too much frontier tragedy to believe in luck. What he believed in was preparation, vigilance, and the folly of risking one's life for replaceable objects. "You'll stay at the ranch until this is sorted," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. The town will rebuild, but it will take time. To his surprise, Eleanor nodded, her momentary fire dimming as exhaustion took hold. Thank you, I seem to be imposing on you again. It's not an imposition. The words came more gently than he intended. That evening, Eleanor sat silent on his porch, staring at the distant mountains as twilight descended. Quentin brought her a cup of coffee, settling into the chair beside her. The town council met this afternoon, he said. They've already started planning the new schoolhouse, larger with proper ventilation and safer stoves. That's good, Eleanor's voice lacked its usual animation. The children are safe, Quentin reminded her. No one blames you for an accident. I know, she traced the rim of her cup with one finger, but I promised those children education would open doors for them, just as it did for me. Now we have no books, no slates, no building. Temporary setbacks. Is that what you tell yourself when things go wrong? She looked at him directly. That hardship is just temporary. Quentin considered her question with more seriousness than she perhaps intended. No, he finally said, I tell myself that hardship is inevitable. It's expecting anything else that brings disappointment. Eleanor's gaze softened. That's a lonely philosophy, Quentin. It's realistic. He stood, uncomfortable with the conversation's turn. The West doesn't reward optimism. Perhaps not, she conceded, but it seems to me the West doesn't punish hope either. Otherwise, none of us would be here. That night, Quentin dreamed of fire, not the schoolhouse blaze, but the burning of his childhood home back in Missouri, when raiders had taken everything his family possessed. He woke breathless, reaching instinctively for his gun before reality settled. The dream was old, but its revival disturbed him. Eleanor's presence was stirring memories he'd worked hard to bury. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor established a temporary school in the town hall while rebuilding commenced. Quentin insisted on driving her to town each morning and collecting her each evening, claiming the efficiency of combining the trips with his other business. In truth, he found himself increasingly protective of her and increasingly aware of her as a woman rather than an obligation. On a warm May evening, they returned from town later than usual after Eleanor had met with parents about the new school term. The sunset painted the mountains in fiery hues, and on impulse, Quentin directed the wagon to a ridge overlooking the valley. What are we doing? Eleanor asked as he helped her down from the wagon. Thought you might appreciate the view, he said, suddenly self-conscious. Best spot on the ranch to watch the sun set. They stood in companionable silence as the light transformed the landscape. Eleanor's profile was gilded in the fading light, her features softened into something approaching traditional beauty. When she turned to him, Quentin realized how close they stood, how natural it felt to be beside her. Thank you for showing me this, she said softly. You're welcome. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Later, he would wonder what might have happened if they'd stayed on that ridge a moment longer. But the distant bellow of a steer broke the spell, and Quentin stepped back, gesturing toward the wagon. The following Sunday brought the community together for a barn raising to benefit the Wilsons, whose property had been damaged in a recent storm. Such events were essential to frontier survival, bringing scattered homesteaders together for work and rare socialization. Eleanor joined the women preparing the feast that would follow the men's labor, while Quentin took his place among the builders. Throughout the morning, he found his attention repeatedly drawn to Eleanor as she moved among the women, her sleeves rolled up, her hair escaping its pins as she worked. When their eyes met across the busy yard, she smiled with a warmth that made him miss his footing on the ladder. Careful there, Blackett, called Johnson, a neighboring rancher. Never known you to be clumsy. Sun in my eyes, Quentin muttered, but Johnson's knowing glance toward Eleanor suggested he wasn't fooled. The afternoon brought games and music after the heavy work was completed. Children raced across the open fields while adults gathered in groups, sharing news and rare leisure. Quentin found himself drawn into a shooting contest with 5 other men, the wagers increasing with each round of marksmanship. Your schoolteacher's watching, Johnson murmured as Quentin prepared for his final shot. Might want to make this one count. Quentin ignored him, focusing on the distant target, but he was acutely aware of Eleanor standing among the spectators. His shot hit dead center, winning him the purse and a round of congratulatory slaps on the back. As the gathering wound down, fiddle music drew couples into impromptu dancing on the packed earth of the Wilsons' new barn floor. Quentin hung back, watching as Eleanor declined several offers to dance, choosing instead to help serve lemonade to the elderly and children. "You should ask her," Sam said, appearing at his side. "Mind your own business," Quentin replied without heat. "Just saying, boss, lady like that won't wait forever." The words struck deeper than Quentin wanted to admit. He'd watched other men in town notice Eleanor, not just for her position as schoolteacher, but for her quiet grace and sharp mind. Johnson himself had tipped his hat to her with particular attention earlier. When the time came to depart, Eleanor surprised him by asking to drive the wagon. "My father taught me when I was 12, she explained. "I miss handling the reins." Quentin hesitated only briefly before handing them over. Eleanor took control with confident hands, her posture straightening as she navigated the team down the rutted road. She looked different somehow, more vivid, more present, doing something that brought her pleasure. "You're good at this," he observed. Father believed women should know practical skills. A wistful smile crossed her face. He said education was worthless without application. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Eleanor's voice caught slightly. "He died last winter, that's why I came west." The simple admission explained much about her journey. "I'm sorry," Quentin said. Eleanor nodded her acknowledgement. "The school board in Philadelphia suggested I needed time to recover from my grief before continuing to teach there. What they meant was that my mourning made the children's parents uncomfortable." The injustice of it tightened Quentin's jaw. Their loss is Silverdale's gain. Her surprised glance told him how rarely she'd received such direct appreciation. They continued in silence until the ranch came into view, the windows of the main house glowing with lamplight that Cookie would have left burning. As they approached the house, Eleanor drew the wagon to a perfect stop. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For trusting me with your horses." Her smile held a mischievous edge. "Men seldom do." "Most men are fools," Quentin replied, helping her down from the seat. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary, and in the silver light of the rising moon, Quentin saw a vulnerability in Eleanor's expression that stirred something protective in him. The fragile moment shattered with the pounding of hooves approaching from the main road. Both turned to see a rider approaching at dangerous speed, the horse lathered despite the cool evening. "Quentin Blackett," the rider called, reining in his exhausted mount. "That's me." Quentin stepped forward, instinctively moving between the stranger and Eleanor. "Telegraph for you from Butte City." The rider extended a folded paper. "Station master said it was urgent." Quentin opened the message, reading it twice to be certain of its contents. "When did this come in?" "This morning. Been riding since noon to find you." Quentin pulled money from his pocket, pressing it into the rider's hand. "Much obliged. Get yourself a meal in town and rest that horse." After the rider departed, Eleanor touched Quentin's arm. "Bad news." "My mother's brother, Uncle James." Quentin refolded the telegram. "He's dying." "Wants to see me." "In Butte City." "No, San Francisco." Quentin's expression hardened. "A journey I can't make with the cattle drive 3 weeks away." Eleanor frowned. "Surely your foreman could." "No," the response came too sharply. Quentin moderated his tone. "The ranch comes first. It's all I have." Eleanor's expression suggested she understood the limitation wasn't merely practical. "When did you last see your uncle?" 15 years ago. After my parents died." Quentin turned toward the house. "He offered to take me in. I refused." "Why?" The simple question stopped him. "Because I didn't want charity." "Is that what family is to you?" "Charity." The challenge in her voice made him turn back to her. "My uncle left the West because he said it was too harsh, too uncultured. He chose city comforts over family land. I chose differently." Eleanor studied him, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes choices made in youth look different with age. "Meaning?" "Meaning perhaps he wants to make amends before it's too late." She stepped closer. "And perhaps you should consider whether your pride is worth losing that chance." Her words followed Quentin into restless dreams that night. By morning, he'd made his decision. He would go to San Francisco, but only because the timing allowed a quick journey before the cattle drive. He told himself it had nothing to do with Eleanor's gentle prodding. "I'll be gone 2 weeks at most," he informed Sam and the other hands at breakfast. "You know what needs doing." Then he turned to Eleanor. Will you be all right staying in town while I'm away, Mrs. Peterson has a spare room she's willing to rent. Eleanor looked surprised. I can manage the house if you're concerned about leaving it empty. I promise not to burn it down. The hint of humor relaxed something in Quentin's chest. It's not that, it's just propriety, Eleanor supplied. A spinster schoolteacher alone in a bachelor rancher's home might set tongues wagging. Something like that. Eleanor considered this. I suppose that depends on how much you value the opinion of gossips. I don't, Quentin admitted, but you might, given your position. I appreciate your concern, she said carefully. But I've found that living by others' expectations is a poor substitute for living by one's own principles. Her quiet defiance reminded Quentin why he'd found her so compelling from the start. Then stay. Cookie will remain to cook, and Sam checks the house daily. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. I'll keep everything in order. The stagecoach journey to the railhead and subsequent train travel gave Quentin too much time to think. He found himself mentally composing letters to Eleanor, describing the changing landscapes and the strange sensation of moving across vast distances without physical effort. He wondered what she would make of the towering redwoods or the salt tang of the ocean air as he approached San Francisco. Uncle James lived in a handsome house overlooking the bay, his wealth evident in the furnishings and the servants who answered the door. The old man himself was diminished by illness, but his eyes brightened at the sight of his nephew. You came, he wheezed, reaching out a thin hand. I came, Quentin confirmed, taking the offered hand gingerly. Didn't think you would, James studied him. You look like your father. Over the next 3 days, Quentin discovered a different version of his uncle than the one he remembered, not the cold, judgmental city dweller who had criticized frontier life, but an aging man with regrets and wisdom earned through his own losses. I should have stayed, James admitted on their 3rd evening together. After your parents died, should have helped you with the ranch. I wouldn't have accepted it, Quentin said honestly. James chuckled weakly. Stubborn as your mother. But a boy shouldn't have faced what you did alone. I managed. At what cost, though? James's gaze was penetrating. You built a fine ranch from what I hear, but what else have you built? Family. Connections. The question cut closer than Quentin expected. He thought of his solitary existence before Eleanor's arrival, the years of purpose without joy, of achievement without sharing. There's a woman, he found himself saying. The schoolteacher in Silverdale. James smiled. Tell me about her. Quentin tried to describe Eleanor objectively, but found himself instead speaking of the way lamplight caught her chestnut hair, how she faced challenges with quiet determination, how her presence had somehow made his house feel like a home. You love her, James stated, not a question. I barely know her. Nonsense, James shifted painfully in his bed. I recognized the look. Your father wore it whenever he spoke of your mother. The comparison startled Quentin. His memories of his parents' relationship were idealized fragments, his mother's laughter, his father's gentle touch on her shoulder, their shared determination in building their homestead. Had he unconsciously sought that same connection with Eleanor? Even if that were true, Quentin said carefully, the life I lead isn't conducive to attachments. James snorted. More excuses. Your father managed both ranch and family. So could you, if you weren't so determined to face the world alone. The conversation left Quentin unsettled, but it wasn't until the following morning, when he found James had passed peacefully in the night, that the full weight of his uncle's words struck him. The old man had used his final strength to offer not just reconciliation, but a warning against Quentin's chosen solitude. The funeral was brief, attended by James's business associates and a few elderly friends. Afterward, the family solicitor informed Quentin that he had inherited his uncle's considerable estate. He changed his will after you telegraphed your intention to visit, the lawyer explained. Said it should go to family, not strangers. The inheritance was substantial enough to transform the ranch, to secure its future against drought or disaster. But more valuable was the leather portfolio the solicitor handed him last. Your uncle's personal papers, he was most insistent you should have them. That night in his hotel room, Quentin opened the portfolio to find dozens of letters from his father to James, spanning 20 years. Letters that revealed a deeper relationship than he'd known existed, filled with mutual respect despite their different choices, with concerns about Quentin's welfare, with a brotherhood that distance had strained but never severed. The final letter, dated just weeks before his parents' deaths, hit Quentin hardest. "I worry for our boy," his father had written. "He has my determination but lacks your balance. Promise me, James, if anything happens to us, you'll help him learn that strength isn't measured by what a man can endure alone, but by what he builds with others." Quentin wept for the first time in 15 years. The return journey seemed interminable. As the train crossed the Sierra Nevada, Quentin found himself thinking of Eleanor with increasing urgency. He needed to see her, to tell her about James, to explain how her insistence on the journey had changed something fundamental in his understanding of family and connection. But when he finally reached Silverdale after 2 weeks away, it was to find the town in turmoil. A diphtheria outbreak had struck 3 families, and Eleanor had volunteered to nurse the children through their illness, quarantined in the doctor's house at the edge of town. "Been there 8 days now," Sheriff Mills told him grimly. "Doc says they're past the worst of it, but Miss Grayson's exhausted herself caring for those youngsters." Quentin rode immediately to the doctor's house, only to be stopped at the porch by Dr. Harper himself. "You can't come in, Blackett. Quarantine's still in effect." "Is she all right?" Quentin demanded. "Tired but healthy. The Morrison boy wouldn't be alive without her." The doctor studied him curiously. "I'll tell her you came by." "Tell her," Quentin faltered, then straightened. "Tell her I'm proud of her and I'll be waiting." 3 more days passed before the quarantine lifted. Quentin was at the ranch when Sam rode in with the news. "Miss Grayson's been released. Saw her heading to her rooms above the Mercantile just now." Quentin was in the saddle before Sam finished speaking, pushing his horse to a gallop along the road to town. He found Eleanor in her small apartment, unpacking the few possessions she'd taken to the doctor's house. She turned at his knock, her face lighting with genuine pleasure. "Quentin, you're back." He stepped inside, suddenly uncertain now that she stood before him. She looked thinner, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, but she was blessedly, beautifully alive. "I heard what you did for the Morrison boy," he said, "and the others." Eleanor shrugged. "Anyone would have helped." "Not anyone." Quentin moved closer. "Dr. Harper says you never left their sides." "They were frightened children far from home." Her voice softened. "I know what that feels like." The simple admission, the glimpse of her own vulnerability, broke through Quentin's remaining reserve. "I missed you," he said plainly. "In San Francisco, on the journey, every day." Eleanor's eyes widened. "I missed you too," she admitted. "The ranch felt empty without you." "My uncle died." Quentin found himself telling her everything. About James, about the letters, about his realization that he'd built his life around the wrong kind of strength. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Eleanor said when he finished, "but grateful you had that time with him." "He left me his estate." Quentin took her hands in his. "Enough to double the ranch's size, build a new house, secure everything I've worked for." Eleanor squeezed his hands. "That's wonderful news. It means nothing without someone to share it with." The words came with unexpected ease. "Eleanor, these past months since you arrived, you've changed everything. How I see my life, my future." She stilled, her expression cautious. "Quentin, don't say such things unless you mean them completely." "I do mean them." He drew her closer. "I love you, Eleanor. I think I have since you stood in my kitchen at dawn, insisting on earning your keep." A flush spread across her cheeks. "I'm not what most men want," she whispered, looking down. "I'm not pretty enough, not delicate enough for—" "You're beautiful where it matters," Quentin interrupted fiercely, tilting her face up to his. "In your courage, your intelligence, your heart, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I love you too," she confessed. "I tried not to. I came west to start fresh, to be independent, not to—" Quentin's kiss silenced her doubts. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, "not because either of us needs saving, but because together we're stronger than we are alone." Eleanor's smile illuminated her entire being. "Yes," she answered simply, "yes." They were married that autumn after the cattle drive and harvest, in a ceremony that united the disparate communities of Silverdale, ranchers and townspeople, old settlers and new arrivals. The newly rebuilt schoolhouse hosted the celebration afterward, its bookshelves now filled with volumes purchased with part of James's inheritance. The ranch transformed too, not just with material improvements, but with the warmth that Eleanor brought to every room. The following spring they broke ground on a new wing, nursery space for the child Eleanor now carried. On warm evenings, they still climbed the ridge to watch the sunset over their expanding property. Quentin would hold Eleanor close, her back against his chest, his hands cradling the growing curve of their child. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her once, coming west. "Choosing this life with me." Eleanor turned in his arms, her face serene in the golden light. "Never. This is exactly where I belong." And in her eyes, Quentin finally saw the truth his uncle had tried to tell him, that the frontier's greatest gift wasn't independence, but the chance to build something meaningful with someone who saw your true worth. In Eleanor he had found not just a wife but a partner who made every hardship bearable and every joy complete. Together they watched the sun sink behind the mountains, silhouetting the land they would pass to their children, a legacy built not on isolation, but on love that had transformed them both.